Shifting childhood poverty memories to abundance, the hidden blueprint for a life of wealth, purpose, and unshakable confidence. This is what you will discover in this video: the untold truth about how the scars of childhood poverty are not chains holding you back, but the raw material for a life of extraordinary abundance, and the step-by-step cinematic journey of how to rewrite your past, reclaim your power, and manifest a future where lack no longer defines you. By the end, you will not only see your history in a new light, but you will hold the keys to unlocking the invisible wealth you've carried all along, waiting to be awakened. This is where it all starts. Not with a grand revelation, but with a memory so quiet it feels like a secret even you've tried to bury. Picture the first time you realized the world had more to give others than it did to you. Whether it was the empty lunchbox you hid behind your backpack, the hand-me-down shoes that never quite fit, or the way your parents' voices tightened when bills arrived like uninvited guests. That moment wasn't just an event, it was the birth of a belief, one that slipped into your bones and taught you without words that life was a game of limitation, that you were meant to ask for less, expect less, and settle for the crumbs left by luckier hands. But what if that memory, the one that still stings when you let yourself feel it, wasn't the beginning of your limitation? What if it was the first spark of a fire you were always meant to build? This is the paradox no one tells you. The very experiences that taught you scarcity were also, in disguise, your first lessons in resilience, creativity, and the raw, unfiltered strength it takes to survive when the odds are stacked against you. As the layers of that memory unfold, you start to see it not as a wound, but as the foundation of a wisdom most people will never earn because they've never had to fight for what they needed. This is where truth breaks through. The realization that poverty didn't just take from you, it forced you to develop skills so sharp, so instinctive, that you wield them now without even recognizing their power. Yet something deeper was waiting in that shadow. And so the question isn't, why did this happen to me, but what did this make me capable of that I haven't yet dared to claim? This is how it unfolds. The child who learned to stretch a single meal into two didn't just learn frugality, they learned resourcefulness, so advanced it could one day build empires from nothing. The teenager who worked 3 jobs to help their family didn't just learn the value of money, they learned a work ethic so unshakable that failure would never be an option, only a temporary detour. The adult who still flinches at the sight of an unexpected bill isn't broken. They're conditioned, yes, but that conditioning is the very thing that will make them hypervigilant stewards of their future wealth, because they've already lived the cost of its absence. This is the turning point, where you stop seeing your past as a curse and start recognizing it as the most brutal, effective training ground for the life you're meant to live. But that was only the beginning. Because the real magic happens when you take those hard-won lessons and deliberately repurpose them, not as survival tactics, but as the blueprint for a life of intentional, unapologetic abundance. As the story of your past rewrites itself in your mind, you'll feel the weight of old beliefs start to lift, replaced by a quiet, unshakable knowing. I was never meant to stay in lack. I was meant to rise from it, and in rising, to redefine what abundance even means. This is why it matters. Because the moment you reframe your history is the moment you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become the architect of your destiny. Yet the journey doesn't end with insight. It demands action. And so the next step is to uncover the hidden assets you've been overlooking, the ones that have been with you all along, waiting for you to see them for what they truly are. Suppose you could step into a room where every scar from your past was not a reminder of pain, but a map to power. What would you finally allow yourself to see? This is where illusion fades, because the story you've been telling yourself about poverty's grip on your life is missing the most critical chapter, the one where lack didn't break you, it forged you. Picture the child you once were, standing in that moment of want, whether it was the silence of an empty refrigerator or the ache of watching others receive what you could only dream of, and realize now that child wasn't just enduring hardship. They were downloading a software of survival so advanced it would one day become the operating system for their success. This is how the alchemy begins. not by erasing the past, but by transmuting it, turning the lead of old limitations into the gold of unshakable strength, because what you once saw as weakness was actually the birthplace of your superpowers. The hands that learned to mend, to stretch, to create from nothing were not the hands of a victim. They were the hands of a future builder, someone who would one day construct empires from the very skills scarcity forced them to master. This is the moment the narrative shifts, because you start to recognize that every time you went without, you are actually being trained in the art of appreciation, in the discipline of delayed gratification, in the mastery of making more from less, a skill set that billionaires pay consultants to teach them. The nights you spent listening to your family's worries about money weren't just nights of fear. They were your first lessons in financial intelligence, in understanding the emotional weight of wealth, in learning that security isn't just about having, it's about knowing how to navigate the storm when the winds turn against you. This is where truth breaks through. The resilience you developed in those moments isn't just a personal trait, it's a marketable asset. The kind that turns setbacks into comebacks and obstacles into stepping stones, because you've already proven you can thrive where others would crumble. Yet the revelation doesn't stop there, because buried beneath the pain of those memories is something even more valuable. The seeds of empathy, of grit, of a kind of wisdom that can't be taught in classrooms or bought with money. As the layers of your past unfold like the pages of a long-forgotten manual, you begin to see that the very things you resented about your upbringing, the struggle, the stretch, the constant need to adapt, were actually the ingredients of a rare and potent formula for success. This is why it matters, because the world doesn't reward the pampered, it rewards the battle-tested, the ones who've been tempered by fire and know how to turn ashes into opportunity. The child who grew up poor didn't just learn to survive, they learned to innovate, to negotiate, to find value where others see none. And those are the exact skills that create legends in business, in art, in life. But that was only the beginning, because the real transformation happens when you take those hard-earned lessons and deliberately weaponize them, turning the pain of your past into the fuel for a future so bright it eclipses every shadow that came before it. This is the turning point, where you stop waiting for abundance to find you and start hunting it down with the ferocity of someone who knows exactly how precious it is. And so the question becomes not how do I escape my past, but how do I leverage every single second of it to create a life so rich, so full, that the child I once was would look at me now and finally exhale. This is how it unfolds. You start by inventorying the skills scarcity gifted you: resourcefulness, resilience, the ability to spot opportunity in disguise, and you begin to apply them not just to survival, but to creation, to building, to claiming the life you were always meant to live. The story of your past isn't a chain, it's a catapult, and the moment you realize that is the moment everything changes, because you're no longer running from lack. You're using it as the launch pad for a future so abundant it rewrites every rule you were ever taught about what's possible. Yet something even deeper is waiting. And so the next step is to uncover the invisible wealth you've been carrying all along, the kind that doesn't show up in bank accounts, but shapes the very essence of who you are and what you're capable of achieving. Ask yourself, what happens when you stop measuring wealth by what's in your wallet and start accounting for the assets no one can ever take from you? Because this is where your real fortune begins. This is the moment the scales fall from your eyes, and you realize that while poverty may have limited your resources, it never could touch the wealth buried deep in your character, your mind, and your spirit. Picture the ledger you've never dared to open, the one where every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of going without was actually a deposit into an account of invisible assets: resilience as your emergency fund, creativity as your high-yield investment, and adaptability as your most valuable currency. This is how the revelation unfolds. The child who grew up with less didn't just survive. They developed a sixth sense for opportunity, a knack for turning nothing into something, and a relationship with money that's rooted not in fear, but in fierce respect for its power. This is where truth breaks through, Because the skills you honed in scarcity are the same ones that build empires. Negotiation, problem solving, the ability to pivot when plans fall apart, and the unshakable belief that if you've made it this far, you can make it further. The late nights you spent helping your family stretch a paycheck weren't just acts of survival. They were your first lessons in financial strategy, in understanding cash flow, in learning how to make every dollar work harder than the last. This is why it matters, because the world doesn't reward those who've had it easy. It rewards those who've had to fight, who've had to think differently, who've had to create value from thin air. And that's exactly what you've been trained to do. Yet the real magic happens when you start to see these strengths not as accidental byproducts of hardship, but as deliberate gifts, ones you can now wield with intention to design a life of abundance on your own terms. As the layers of your past continue to unfold, you begin to recognize that your greatest wealth isn't something you lack. It's something you've been cultivating all along, often without even realizing it. This is the turning point, where you stop waiting for permission to thrive and start claiming the abundance that's already yours, simply because you've earned it through every trial you've overcome. The discipline you developed from having to wait, the gratitude you cultivated from having to appreciate the small things, the hustle you perfected from having to make your own luck. These aren't just traits. They're your competitive advantage in a world that often mistakes privilege for strength. But that was only the beginning, because the next step is to turn these invisible assets into tangible results, to take the wealth you've been carrying inside and manifest it in the world around you. This is how it unfolds. You start by naming your strengths, by listing the skills scarcity sharpened in you, and then you begin to apply them, not just to get by, but to thrive, to build, to create a legacy that proves lack was never your destiny. The story of your past isn't a burden. It's a blueprint. And the moment you start using it as one is the moment your life shifts from surviving to soaring. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey continues as you learn to manifest this abundance, not just in theory, but in every single area of your life, starting today. Envision a world where every skill you developed in scarcity becomes a tool for creating the life you once only dreamed of. Because this is where the transformation becomes real. This is the moment you stop theorizing about abundance and start living it, not by waiting for a windfall, but by conducting an abundance audit, a deliberate, daily practice of recognizing and leveraging the wealth you've already earned. Picture yourself sitting down with a blank page, not to list what you lack, but to inventory the assets poverty forced you to cultivate, the ability to stretch resources, the knack for spotting opportunities others miss, the resilience that turns setbacks into setups for comebacks. This is how the shift begins, because abundance isn't something you stumble into, it's something you build, brick by brick, using the very tools scarcity sharpened in your hands. This is where truth breaks through. The discipline you learned from going without is now your superpower in a world that rewards focus and determination. The creativity you honed from making do is now your secret weapon in solving problems others can't even see. The empathy you developed from understanding struggle is now your bridge to connections deeper than money could ever buy. This is why it matters, because the life you're meant to live isn't built on what you were given, but on what you've overcome and how you've grown from it. Yet the real work starts when you take this audit beyond the page and into your daily life, when you begin to see every interaction, every challenge, every small win as proof that abundance isn't a distant destination. It's the ground beneath your feet waiting to be claimed. As the layers of this practice unfold, you start to notice how your past has already prepared you for this moment, how the lessons of lack are now the foundation of your confidence. This is the turning point, where you stop waiting for permission to thrive and start giving it to yourself, where you stop seeing your history as a limitation and start using it as leverage. The budgeting skills you mastered out of necessity are now the framework for your financial freedom. The resourcefulness you developed from having to improvise is now the spark for your next big idea. The gratitude you cultivated from appreciating small blessings is now the magnet that attracts even greater ones. But that was only the beginning, because the next step is to turn this awareness into action, to take the wealth you've uncovered within and manifest it in the world around you, not as a distant possibility, but as your everyday reality. This is how it unfolds. You start small, by celebrating the abundance already present in your life. The roof over your head, the food on your table, the people who love you, the skills that have carried you this far. Then you begin to expand, to seek out opportunities that align with your strengths, to invest in yourself with the same fierce determination that once kept you afloat. The story of your past isn't a chain holding you back. It's a springboard, and the moment you jump is the moment your life shifts from surviving to thriving. Yet something even more powerful is waiting. And so the journey continues as you learn to manifest this abundance, not just for yourself, but as a legacy for those who come after you, proving that lack was never the end of your story. It was only the first chapter. Think of the moment when you realize your past isn't just a memory. It's a legacy in the making. And the way you frame it today will determine the world you leave behind tomorrow. This is where the narrative transcends personal transformation and becomes something greater, a blueprint not just for your own abundance, but for the generations that will follow in your footsteps. Picture the child you once were, standing at the edge of lack, unaware that every lesson they were learning in that moment would one day become the foundation of a dynasty. One built not on inherited wealth, but on inherited wisdom, resilience, and the unshakable knowledge that scarcity is never the end of the story. This is how the legacy begins, not with what you were given, but with what you chose to build from the fragments of what you weren't. Because the most powerful inheritances aren't found in bank accounts. They're written in the stories we refuse to let define us. This is where truth breaks through. The way you reframe your past isn't just about healing yourself. It's about rewriting the script for your children, your community, and everyone who will ever look to your life as proof of what's possible. The discipline you cultivated in hardship is now the curriculum you'll teach those who come after you, not as a cautionary tale, but as a masterclass in turning obstacles into opportunities. The creativity you developed from making something out of nothing is now the innovation you'll pass down, showing them how to see potential where others see only limits. This is why it matters, because legacy isn't about leaving behind money. It's about leaving behind a mindset, a way of moving through the world that turns every challenge into a stepping stone and every setback into a setup for something greater. Yet the real power of this legacy lies in how you choose to live it today, in the daily decisions that prove lack was never your identity, but merely the first act in a story of relentless reinvention. As the layers of this realization unfold, you begin to see that your greatest responsibility isn't to escape your past, but to honor it by building a future so bright it eclipses every shadow that came before. This is the turning point, where you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start declaring, "This is what I will create because of it." The resilience you once saw as a burden is now the cornerstone of the life you're constructing, a life where abundance isn't just a personal achievement, but a ripple effect that touches everyone around you. The lessons you learned in scarcity are now the gifts you give to others, not as charity, but as empowerment, showing them how to turn their own struggles into strength. But that was only the beginning, because the final step is to step fully into the role of the architect of your legacy, to design a future so compelling that the child you once were would look at you now and know, without a doubt, that their pain was never in vain. This is how it unfolds. You start by living in a way that honors the lessons of your past, while refusing to be confined by them, by making choices that reflect the abundance you've chosen to embody. You invest in yourself, in your dreams, and in the people who will carry your legacy forward, not because you have to, but because you get to, because you've earned the right to build something lasting. The story of your life isn't just about you anymore. It's about the doors you'll open, the minds you'll inspire, and the proof you'll leave behind that abundance is never about what you start with, but about what you refuse to settle for. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey culminates in the ultimate act of creation. designing a future where your past is no longer a ghost, but a guide. A testament to the fact that the greatest legacies are built not from what we're given, but from what we choose to rise above. Now consider this. What if the key to permanent abundance isn't a single breakthrough, but a series of deliberate daily rituals that rewire your brain to see and seize opportunity everywhere? This is where the rubber meets the road, where insight transforms into action, and where your new story of abundance becomes as natural as breathing. Picture waking up each morning not with the old reflex of bracing for lack, but with a ritual designed to anchor you in the truth of what you already possess: the skills, the resilience, the creative fire that poverty could never extinguish. This is how the shift solidifies, not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of defiance against the scarcity mindset, like listing 3 ways you've already won today before your feet even hit the floor, or standing in front of the mirror and naming the strengths your past forged in you like a blacksmith's hammer shaping steel. This is where truth breaks through. Abundance isn't something you find, it's something you practice, and the rituals you choose are the brushstrokes painting your new reality. The 5 minutes you spend each night writing down what you created, not just what you consumed, trains your mind to focus on contribution over comparison, on growth over grasping. The habit of turning every "I can't afford this" into "how can I create this" flips scarcity on its head, transforming obstacles into creative challenges that sharpen your problem-solving like a whetstone. This is why it matters, because rituals aren't just habits, they're the architecture of your identity. And when you design them intentionally, you build a self that operates from abundance as effortlessly as a bird rides the wind. Yet the real magic lies in the rituals that connect you to the feeling of abundance before the physical evidence arrives, like lighting a candle while visualizing your future self already living the life you're building, or carrying a small token in your pocket, a smooth stone, a coin, a note, that grounds you in the certainty that wealth is already yours. As the layers of these practices weave into your daily life, you begin to notice how the world responds differently to the version of you who moves through it with expectation rather than hesitation. This is the turning point, where abundance stops being a distant goal and starts showing up in the details. The unexpected discount, the perfect opportunity arriving just as you're ready for it, the synchronicities that feel like the universe winking at your newfound confidence. The gratitude you practice isn't just polite acknowledgement, it's a magnet, pulling more of what you appreciate into your orbit, because energy flows where attention goes. The boundaries you set around your time and energy aren't acts of deprivation. They're declarations that you refuse to leak your resources on what doesn't align with your vision, and that discipline becomes its own form of currency. But that was only the beginning, because the final ritual, the one that cements this transformation, is the act of giving from your abundance, not as a sacrifice, but as a celebration of how far you've come, and a signal to the universe that you're ready for even more. This is how it unfolds. You start each day by feeding your mind with stories of possibility, biographies of those who built empires from nothing, podcasts about innovation, or even your own journal entries tracking your progress. You end each day by asking, where did I see abundance today? And how did I contribute to it? Questions that train your brain to scan for evidence of your new reality. The story of your life is no longer about waiting for abundance to arrive. It's about recognizing it's already here, in the way you think, the way you act, and the way you now move through the world as someone who knows their worth. Yet something even more powerful is waiting. And so the journey reaches its climax as you prepare to step fully into the role of the creator of your reality, where every ritual, every choice, every small act of faith becomes a brick in the empire you're no longer just dreaming of, you're building. Can you imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever called lack was actually the raw material for a life more extraordinary than you'd ever dared to dream? This is where the final veil lifts, where the illusion of scarcity dissolves like mist under the sun, and you see, really see, for the first time that what you perceived as emptiness was always the space where your greatest strengths were being forged. Picture the moments you once resented, the empty pantry, the hand-me-down clothes, the dreams deferred, not as evidence of what you didn't have, but as the crucible that burned away everything unnecessary, leaving only the essential, unbreakable core of who you were meant to become. This is how the revelation lands. The very things you thought limited you were actually the training ground for the skills that will now set you free. Because poverty didn't take anything from you. It revealed what you were truly capable of creating. This is where truth breaks through. The lack you've spent years trying to escape was never your enemy. It was your most relentless teacher, forcing you to develop the exact strengths that will now catapult you into abundance. The hunger you felt wasn't just an ache, it was the birthplace of your ambition. The fire that taught you to chase opportunities with a ferocity others will never understand. The instability you endured wasn't just chaos. It was the classroom where you learned adaptability, the superpower that lets you pivot when others freeze. This is why it matters. Because the world doesn't reward the comfortable, it rewards the battle-tested. The ones who've stared down emptiness and still chose to believe in possibility. And that's exactly who you've become. Yet, the real liberation comes when you stop seeing your past as something to overcome and start recognizing it as the very foundation of your competitive edge, the proof that you were built for this moment, for this level of greatness. As the layers of this illusion peel away, you begin to understand that scarcity was never a life sentence. It was a temporary assignment, one that equipped you with the tools to build a future so abundant, it renders the old story obsolete. This is the turning point, where you stop apologizing for where you came from and start leveraging it as your origin story, the kind that makes people lean in when you speak, because they can feel the weight of the wisdom you've earned. The discipline you developed from having to wait is now your secret weapon in a world that rewards patience and strategy. The creativity you honed from making do is now your signature strength, the thing that lets you see solutions where others see dead ends. The empathy you cultivated from understanding struggle is now your bridge to connections that run deeper than transactions. Because people don't just remember what you have, they remember how you make them feel. But that was only the beginning, because the final step is to take this reframed perspective and use it to design a life so rich in meaning, purpose, and joy that the old narrative of lack doesn't just fade. It becomes completely unrecognizable. This is how it unfolds. You start by auditing your language, replacing every "I can't" with "how can I?" and every "I don't have" with "I'm creating." Because the words you use are the blueprint for the reality you inhabit. You begin to seek out opportunities not as a desperate grasp, but as a strategic claim of what's already yours, because you've already proven you can turn nothing into something, a skill most people will never possess. The story of your life is no longer a tale of survival. It's a legend of reinvention, where every chapter of lack becomes a testament to your ability to rise, to adapt, and to thrive in ways that defy expectation. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey reaches its crescendo as you prepare to step into the fullest expression of who you were always meant to be. Not in spite of your past, but because of it. With every scar now a badge of honor, and every lesson a stepping stone to the extraordinary. Picture for a moment the exact second you realize that abundance isn't something you chase. It's something you embody, a frequency you tune into, a version of yourself you finally give permission to exist. This is where the transformation becomes irreversible, where the pursuit of wealth shifts from an external hunt to an internal awakening, and you understand that the life you've been waiting for was always waiting for you to claim it. Imagine standing in front of a mirror and seeing, not the person who once flinched at the sight of a bill, not the child who learned to hide their want, but the architect of their own destiny, someone who carries wealth not just in their pockets, but in their posture, their decisions, and the unshakable knowing that they are the creator of their reality. This is how the shift happens. Not when your bank account hits a certain number, but when you start moving through the world as someone who already operates from abundance, because wealth is first a mindset before it ever becomes a material fact. This is where truth breaks through. The moment you stop asking, When will I be rich? And start declaring, I am wealth in motion. Everything changes because the universe responds not to what you want, but to who you are. The way you hold yourself in a room, the confidence with which you speak about your dreams, the ease with which you receive opportunities, these are the real currencies of abundance, and they're all accessible the moment you decide to step into this identity. The budgeting skills you once used to survive are now the tools of a strategist, someone who allocates resources with precision because they understand the true value of what they've earned. The resilience you built in hardship is now the foundation of your unshakable self-trust, the kind that lets you take calculated risks because you know, without a doubt, that you can handle whatever comes. This is why it matters, because abundance isn't about what you accumulate, it's about who you become in the process, and that version of you is already here, waiting to be fully unleashed. As the layers of this identity settle into place, you begin to notice how the world mirrors back the energy you project, how doors open for the person who walks like they belong in the room, how opportunities gravitate toward those who radiate readiness. This is the turning point where you stop waiting for permission to thrive and start giving it to yourself, where you stop seeing wealth as something outside of you and start recognizing it as the natural state of someone who has already proven they can create value from thin air. The gratitude you practice isn't just a polite exercise. It's the vibration that attracts more of what you appreciate, because abundance flows toward those who are already in the frequency of receiving. The boundaries you set aren't walls, they're declarations of self-worth, signals to the universe that you refuse to settle for less than what aligns with your vision. But that was only the beginning, because the final step is to let this identity shape not just your actions, but your expectations. To move through the world with the quiet certainty that wealth, in all its forms, is your birthright. And the proof is in every step you've already taken to get here. This is how it unfolds. You start by dressing the part, not to impress others, but to remind yourself of who you're becoming, because the clothes you wear, the words you speak, and the energy you carry are all part of the costume of this new identity. You begin to invest in yourself not as an expense, but as the highest yield asset you own, because the more you nurture your growth, the more the world conspires to reflect it back to you. The story of your life is no longer about escaping lack. It's about embodying the truth that you were always meant for abundance, and the evidence is in the way you now move through the world. As someone who doesn't just dream of wealth, but is wealth in every sense of the word. Yet something even more extraordinary is waiting. And so the journey reaches its pinnacle as you prepare to step into the final act, not just creating abundance for yourself, but becoming a beacon for others to do the same, proving that the greatest legacy isn't what you leave behind, but the lives you inspire to rise. Suppose you discover that your journey from scarcity to abundance was never just about you. It was about lighting a torch so bright it illuminates the path for everyone who comes after you. This is where the story expands beyond personal triumph and becomes a movement, where your transformation stops being a private victory and starts being a public invitation for others to rewrite their own narratives. Imagine the moment you realize that every skill you honed in hardship, every lesson you carved from lack, and every ounce of resilience you forged in the fire of struggle wasn't just for your survival. It was to show others what's possible when you refuse to let circumstances dictate your destiny. This is how the ripple begins. Not with a grand speech or a viral post, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who walks into a room and makes others believe. If they can do it, so can I. This is where truth breaks through. Your abundance isn't just a personal achievement, it's a revolution in motion, because the way you live your life now becomes the proof that scarcity isn't a life sentence, but a temporary detour on the road to greatness. The way you handle money, with respect, strategy, and generosity, teaches those around you that wealth isn't about hoarding, but about stewarding resources to create more value, more opportunity, more freedom. The way you face challenges, not with fear but with curiosity and determination, shows others that setbacks aren't dead ends, but setups for comebacks that can redefine entire trajectories. This is why it matters, because the world doesn't change when one person escapes poverty. It changes when one person transcends it and then turns around to pull others up with them, proving that abundance isn't a solo journey, but a collective rising. As the layers of this ripple effect unfold, you begin to see how your choices, where you invest your time, how you spend your energy, the way you lift others, create waves that extend far beyond your own life. This is the turning point, where your abundance stops being something you possess and starts being something you radiate, a frequency that shifts the energy of every space you enter. The way you celebrate small wins, not just your own, but those of the people around you, creates a culture where progress is contagious, where every victory is proof that growth is possible. The way you share your story, not as a boast, but as a bridge, gives others permission to see their own struggles as temporary, their own potential as limitless. The way you invest in others, not out of obligation, but out of the deep understanding that true wealth is measured by the lives you impact, turns your abundance into a legacy that outlives you. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this journey is to recognize that your greatest contribution isn't what you accumulate, but what you awaken in others. The moment they look at you and think, if they can rewrite their story, I can rewrite mine. This is how it unfolds. You start by mentoring one person, by sharing one lesson, by offering one hand up, and in that act, you create a domino effect of empowerment that you may never fully see, but will always feel in the depth of your purpose. You begin to build not just for yourself, but for the community that will rise with you, because true abundance is never isolated. It's a tide that lifts all boats. The story of your life is no longer just about how far you've come. It's about how many people you bring with you, how many hearts you inspire to believe in their own capacity for greatness. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey reaches its ultimate fulfillment as you step into the role of the architect of a new narrative, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been told their past defines their future, proving that abundance isn't something you keep, but something you multiply. Envision a world where your name becomes synonymous with possibility, not because of what you owned, but because of the lives you transformed, by proving that lack is never the end of the story. This is where your journey transcends personal success and becomes a legacy, where the lessons you carved from scarcity and the abundance you built from resilience become the foundation for a new way of living, not just for you, but for everyone who follows in your footsteps. Picture the child who will one day hear your story, the one about the empty cupboards that taught you resourcefulness, the unpaid bills that forced you to innovate, the dreams deferred that only made you hungrier, and realize that their own struggles aren't dead ends, but the raw material for their future greatness. This is how the legacy is born, not in the quiet of personal achievement, but in the echo of your life as it reverberates through time, proving that abundance isn't about what you start with, but about what you refuse to let define you. This is where truth breaks through. The most powerful legacy you can leave isn't money in a bank account. It's the unshakable belief, passed down like an heirloom, that no circumstance can ever limit someone who chooses to rewrite their story. The way you turned every no into a how, every setback into a setup, and every moment of doubt into fuel for your fire becomes the playbook for those who come after you, showing them that the path from scarcity to abundance isn't a straight line, but a series of intentional choices to see possibility where others see only limits. The way you now move through the world, not as someone who escaped lack, but as someone who transcended it, teaches them that wealth isn't about what you have, but about who you become in the process of claiming it. This is why it matters, because legacies aren't built on what we accumulate, but on what we awaken in others. And your life is now the living proof that abundance is a mindset that can be learned, a frequency that can be tuned into, and a reality that can be created from the ground up. As the layers of this legacy take shape, you begin to understand that your greatest responsibility isn't to hoard your wisdom, but to share it, to turn your scars into lessons, your struggles into strategies, and your comebacks into roadmaps for anyone who's ever felt stuck in the cycle of lack. This is the turning point, where your abundance stops being a personal triumph and starts being a public invitation, where your story becomes the spark that ignites 1,000 others to believe in their own power to rise. The way you now speak about money, not with fear or shame, but with respect and mastery, gives others permission to reclaim their own relationship with wealth, to see it not as a source of stress, but as a tool for creation. The way you celebrate progress, not just your own, but that of everyone around you, creates a culture where growth is expected, where every small win is a stepping stone to something greater. The way you invest in the next generation, not just with resources, but with the belief that they, too, can build something extraordinary from nothing, ensures that your impact will outlive you, that your name will be whispered in the halls of possibility long after you're gone. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this legacy is to step fully into the role of the guardian of this new narrative. The one who doesn't just live abundantly, but who teaches abundance as a way of life, proving that the greatest wealth isn't what you leave behind, but the lives you empower to soar. This is how it unfolds. You start by documenting your journey, not as a memoir of struggle, but as a manual for transformation, where every lesson becomes a tool someone else can use to build their own bridge from lack to abundance. You begin to create spaces, whether through mentorship, community, or art, where others can see themselves in your story and find the courage to write their own. The story of your life is no longer just about how you turned scarcity into abundance. It's about how you turned your abundance into a ladder for others to climb. How you made sure that no one who comes after you ever has to believe that their past determines their future. Yet something even more sacred is waiting, and so the journey culminates in the ultimate realization that your legacy isn't just what you build, but what you inspire. The moment someone looks at their own life, sees the echoes of your story in their struggles, and decides, if they could do it, I can too. Ask yourself what happens when one person's refusal to accept scarcity as their destiny ignites a fire so bright it lights the way for thousands. Because this is where your story stops being yours alone and becomes the spark of a revolution. This is the moment your journey transcends personal transformation and becomes a collective awakening, where the tools you forged in hardship and the abundance you built from resilience become the foundation for a movement that redefines what's possible for an entire generation. Picture the ripple effect of your life, not as a single drop in the ocean, but as the tide that shifts the shore, where every person who hears your story feels the ground beneath them tremble with the realization that their past doesn't have to dictate their future. This is how the revolution begins. Not with a grand declaration, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who has walked through the fire of lack and emerged not just unscathed, but empowered, and now refuses to let anyone else believe they're stuck in the same cycle. This is where truth breaks through. The most powerful movements aren't built on charisma or resources. They're built on proof. And your life is now the living evidence that scarcity isn't a life sentence, but a temporary condition that can be overcome with the right mindset, tools, and relentless determination. The way you turned every obstacle into an opportunity, every setback into a setup, and every moment of doubt into fuel for your fire becomes the blueprint for others to do the same. Not because you tell them to, but because you show them it's possible. The way you now speak about abundance, not as a distant dream, but as an everyday reality, gives others permission to reclaim their own narratives, to see their struggles not as limitations, but as the raw material for their future greatness. This is why it matters, because revolutions don't start with the masses. They start with one person who dares to live differently, to believe differently, and to prove that a new way is possible, and that one person is you. As the layers of this movement take shape, you begin to see how your story, once a private journey, is now a public invitation, a call to arms for anyone who has ever felt trapped by their circumstances. This is the turning point, where your abundance stops being a personal achievement and starts being a rallying cry, where your life becomes the proof that change isn't just possible, It's inevitable for those who refuse to accept the status quo. The way you now invest in others, not just with money, but with belief, with time, with the unshakable conviction that they too can rise, creates a network of empowerment that grows exponentially. Because true abundance is never hoarded, it's multiplied. The way you celebrate every small win, every breakthrough, every moment of progress, not just in your own life, but in the lives of those around you, builds a culture where growth is expected, where setbacks are temporary, and where success is seen as a collective triumph. The way you now move through the world, not as someone who escaped lack, but as someone who transcended it, inspires others to do the same, to see their own struggles as the training ground for the greatness they're meant to achieve. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this revolution is to step fully into the role of its leader, not by force, but by example, proving that the greatest power isn't in what you accumulate, but in what you awaken in others. This is how it unfolds. You start by sharing your story, not as a tale of survival, but as a roadmap for transformation, where every lesson becomes a tool someone else can use to build their own bridge from scarcity to abundance. You begin to create platforms, whether through mentorship, education, or community, that give others the space to see themselves in your journey and find the courage to write their own. The story of your life is no longer just about how you turned lack into abundance. It's about how you turned your abundance into a movement, how you made sure that no one who comes after you ever has to believe that their past determines their future. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey reaches its climax as you realize that this revolution isn't just about changing individual lives. It's about changing the narrative of what's possible, proving that abundance isn't a privilege reserved for the few, but a birthright waiting to be claimed by anyone brave enough to rewrite their story. Can you imagine the exact moment you decide, once and for all, that your life will no longer be defined by what you lacked, but by what you choose to create? This is where the revolution becomes personal again, where the movement you've inspired circles back to you in the form of a manifesto, a declaration so bold, so unapologetic, that it reshapes not just your future, but the future of everyone who dares to adopt it as their own. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a new era, not as someone who survived scarcity, but as someone who conquered it, and now refuses to let its shadows dictate even one more chapter of your story. This is how the manifesto begins, not with a whisper of hope, but with a roar of certainty, a statement so clear and so powerful that it silences every doubt, every old belief, every lingering fear that you don't deserve the life you're about to claim. This is where truth breaks through. Your abundance isn't a lucky break or a distant dream. It's a choice, one that you make every single day with your words, your actions, and the unshakable belief that you are the architect of your reality. The way you now speak about your future, not as a question of if, but as a declaration of when, rewires your brain to scan for opportunities instead of obstacles, to see possibilities where others see dead ends. The way you handle challenges, not as proof of your limitations, but as evidence of your ability to adapt and overcome, proves to yourself and the world that you are not a victim of your circumstances, but the creator of your destiny. This is why it matters. Because a manifesto isn't just a list of goals, it's a pledge to yourself, a vow that you will no longer wait for permission for the right time or for someone else to validate your worth. You are declaring, right here and right now, that your life will be a testament to the power of reinvention and that your story will inspire others to do the same. As the words of this manifesto take shape, you begin to feel the weight of its power, not as a burden, but as a foundation, the bedrock upon which you'll build the rest of your life. This is the turning point, where you stop asking for crumbs and start demanding the feast, where you stop apologizing for your ambition and start owning it as the driving force of your existence. The way you now invest in yourself, not as an indulgence, but as the highest form of self-respect, sends a message to the universe that you are ready to receive the abundance you've always been worthy of. The way you set boundaries, not as walls, but as declarations of your value, ensures that your energy, your time, and your resources are reserved for what aligns with your vision, and nothing less. The way you now celebrate your progress, not as a fluke, but as evidence of your inevitable success, reinforces the belief that you are not just capable of greatness, but destined for it. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this manifesto is to step into the role of its living embodiment, to become the proof that a life without limits isn't just possible, it's already yours for the taking. This is how it unfolds. You start by writing it down, not as a wish list, but as a contract with yourself, a document so clear and so compelling that it leaves no room for doubt. You begin each day by reading it aloud, not as a reminder of what you lack, but as a reinforcement of what you are and what you're building. The story of your life is no longer a tale of survival. It's a legend of liberation, where every word of your manifesto becomes a brick in the empire you're constructing, and every declaration becomes a promise to the child you once were, that their struggles were never in vain. Yet something even more transformative is waiting. And so the journey reaches its peak as you prepare to live this manifesto not just in private, but in public, as a beacon for others to follow, as proof that abundance isn't a matter of luck, but of choice, and that the life you've declared is already yours, waiting to be claimed. What if the next 30 days became the laboratory where you finally prove to yourself, beyond any shadow of doubt, that the life you've been dreaming of isn't just possible, but inevitable? This is where the manifesto transforms into action, where theory meets reality, and where you step into the role of both scientist and subject in the most important experiment of your life. What happens when someone who once knew only scarcity decides to live as if abundance is their natural state? Picture yourself designing this experiment not as a test of your worth, but as a celebration of it, a 30-day challenge where every action, every decision, and every thought is aligned with the version of you who already operates from wealth, confidence, and unshakable self-trust. This is how the experiment begins. Not with hesitation, but with the thrill of discovery. The knowing that you're about to gather irrefutable evidence that your past was never a limitation, it was preparation for this exact moment. This is where truth breaks through. The only way to shatter the illusion of scarcity is to live in defiance of it, to act as if the abundance you seek is already yours, and to watch as the world rearranges itself to match your conviction. The way you start each morning, not by checking your bank account with anxiety, but by asking, how will I create and receive abundance today? Rewires your brain to operate from possibility instead of lack. The way you approach challenges, not as proof that you're not ready, but as opportunities to prove how resourceful you've always been, turns every obstacle into a chance to flex the muscles you built in hardship. This is why it matters, because this experiment isn't about waiting for abundance to arrive. It's about becoming the kind of person abundance naturally gravitates toward, someone who moves through the world with the quiet certainty that they are a magnet for opportunities, connections, and breakthroughs. As the days of the experiment unfold, you begin to notice the shifts, not just in your circumstances, but in you. This is the turning point where you stop questioning whether you deserve abundance and start expecting it, where every small win becomes proof that your new mindset is working. The way you now spend money, not with guilt or fear, but with intention and gratitude, sends a signal to your subconscious that you trust yourself to manage wealth wisely. The way you invest your time, not in distractions or self-doubt, but in actions that align with your vision, proves to yourself that you're serious about this new identity. The way you respond to setbacks, not with despair, but with curiosity and resilience, shows you that the skills you honed in scarcity are now your greatest assets in creation. But that was only the beginning, because the real power of this experiment lies in what happens when you start to see the results, not just in your bank account, but in your confidence, your relationships, and the unshakable knowing that you are exactly where you're meant to be. This is how it unfolds. You track every win, no matter how small, every unexpected opportunity, every moment of synchronicity, every time you choose faith over fear, as evidence that abundance is your natural state. You share your progress not as a brag, but as an invitation for others to join you, to see that this isn't luck, but a practice anyone can adopt. The story of your life is no longer about escaping scarcity. It's about proving that abundance is a skill, a mindset, and a way of being, and that you've mastered it. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the experiment reaches its climax as you prepare to step into the final phase. Living this way not for 30 days, but for the rest of your life, knowing that the limits you once feared were never real. They were just the edges of a smaller version of yourself, and you've long since outgrown them. Now consider this. What if the only thing standing between you and the life you've been chasing isn't money, luck, or circumstance, but the moment you decide to stop pursuing abundance and start embodying it? This is the threshold, the invisible line where everything changes, not because your external world shifts overnight, but because you do. Imagine standing at the edge of this crossing, where the version of you who once begged for crumbs meets the version who now knows they were always meant for the feast, and chooses, once and for all, to step forward. This is how the crossing happens. Not with a grand gesture, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who realizes that abundance isn't a destination. It's a way of moving through the world, and you've been practicing for this moment your entire life. This is where truth breaks through. The threshold isn't crossed with a single leap. It's crossed with a series of deliberate, daily choices that prove to yourself and the universe that you're no longer playing small. The way you now speak about your future, not as a distant someday, but as an inevitable now, rewires your nervous system to operate from confidence instead of doubt. The way you handle money, not with fear or desperation, but with respect and strategy, signals to your subconscious that you're ready to steward even greater resources. The way you show up in the world, not as someone hoping for a seat at the table, but as someone who builds tables, proves that your mindset has shifted from scarcity to sovereignty. This is why it matters. Because crossing this threshold isn't about arriving. It's about becoming. And the life you've been waiting for was always waiting for this version of you to show up. As you stand firmly on the other side of this line, you begin to notice how the world responds differently to the person who moves with the quiet certainty of someone who knows their worth. This is the turning point, where abundance stops being something you seek and starts being something you radiate, where every decision, every conversation, and every action is infused with the energy of someone who has already claimed their power. The way you now set goals, not as wishes but as commands to the universe, demonstrates that you've moved from hoping to knowing. The way you handle setbacks, not as evidence of failure but as data points in your experiment, shows that you've mastered the art of turning obstacles into opportunities. The way you celebrate others' success, not with envy but with genuine joy, proves that you operate from an energy of enoughness, where someone else's win doesn't diminish yours, but expands the collective belief in what's possible. But that was only the beginning. Because the final act of crossing this threshold is to realize that you're not just stepping into a new chapter, you're stepping into a new identity, one where abundance isn't something you chase, but something you are. This is how it unfolds. You begin to move through the world with a new kind of authority, not the kind that comes from titles or money, but the kind that comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that you are the creator of your reality. You start to notice how opportunities seem to find you, how conversations shift in your favor, how the right people and resources appear as if magnetized by your new energy. The story of your life is no longer about the struggle to escape lack. It's about the power of standing firmly in the truth that you were always meant for more. And now, you're finally living it. Yet something even more extraordinary is waiting, and so the journey reaches its zenith as you prepare to step into the final role, not just as someone who has crossed the threshold, but as someone who holds the door open for others, proving that abundance isn't a solo journey. It's a frequency we're all meant to tune into, and you've just become its most powerful transmitter. Suppose you could adjust the dial of your life to a frequency where abundance isn't something you chase, but something that naturally flows to you, like a radio station you finally tuned into after years of static. This is where the magic happens, where the struggle stops and the synchronicities begin, where you realize that wealth, real wealth, isn't about what you have, but about the energy you emit. Picture yourself standing in the center of this frequency, where every thought, every decision, and every action vibrates at the level of someone who knows, without a shadow of doubt, that they are a magnet for opportunities, connections, and breakthroughs. This is how the tuning begins, not with a sudden windfall, but with the quiet, unshakable awareness that you finally aligned with the version of yourself who was always meant to thrive. This is where truth breaks through. Abundance isn't something you get, it's something you match. And the moment you align your energy with the frequency of wealth, the universe has no choice but to reflect it back to you. The way you now think about money, not as a source of stress, but as a tool for creation, shifts your entire relationship with it, turning every financial decision into an act of empowerment rather than fear. The way you approach challenges, not as roadblocks, but as redirections, proves that you've mastered the art of seeing opportunity where others see only obstacles. The way you speak about your future, not with hesitation, but with absolute certainty, rewires your brain to scan for evidence of your success, pulling it into reality like a tractor beam. This is why it matters, because this frequency isn't about luck or privilege, it's about alignment, and you finally calibrated yourself to the channel where wealth flows as naturally as breath. As you settle into this new vibration, you begin to notice how the world responds to the energy you're emitting, how the right people seem to appear at the perfect time, how opportunities unfold with an almost eerie precision, how the things you once had to fight for now come to you with ease. This is the turning point, where you stop working for abundance and start allowing it, where the hustle is replaced by a deep, unshakable trust that what's meant for you will find you. The way you now receive, not with guilt or unworthiness, but with open hands and gratitude, signals to the universe that you're ready for even more. The way you give, not from lack, but from overflow, creates a cycle of abundance that keeps expanding, because energy always returns to its source. The way you trust your intuition, not as a whim, but as a compass, proves that you've finally learned to listen to the wisdom that was always inside you, waiting to guide you toward what's yours. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of tuning into this frequency is to realize that you're not just receiving abundance, you're becoming it. And the life you've always wanted is now flowing to you as effortlessly as a river finds the sea. This is how it unfolds. You start to move through the world with a new kind of ease, where every decision feels inspired, every interaction feels meaningful, and every day feels like a step deeper into the life you were meant to live. You begin to attract not just money, but the right opportunities, the right relationships, and the right resources, because you've finally aligned with the energy that draws them to you. The story of your life is no longer about the struggle to escape scarcity. It's about the power of living in the frequency where abundance is your natural state, and every day is proof that you were always meant to thrive. Yet something even more profound is waiting. And so the journey reaches its culmination as you prepare to step into the final role. Not just as someone who is tuned into this frequency, but as someone who amplifies it, becoming a beacon for others to find their own channel of effortless flow, and proving that abundance isn't a secret. It's a vibration, and you've finally learned how to dance to its rhythm. Think of the moment when your life becomes more than just a story. It becomes a legacy, an echo that travels through time, touching lives you'll never meet, inspiring dreams you'll never see, but knowing, without a doubt, that your journey from scarcity to abundance will forever change the trajectory of those who hear it. This is where your impact transcends the boundaries of your own lifetime, where the lessons you've learned and the abundance you've created become the foundation for a new way of living, not just for you, but for generations to come. Picture the child, decades from now, who hears your name and feels a spark of recognition, as if your story was written just for them, as if your struggles and triumphs were meant to light their own path. This is how the echo begins, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, unshakable knowing that your life will serve as proof that no circumstance can ever define someone who refuses to be confined by it. This is where truth breaks through. The most powerful echoes aren't created by what you have, but by what you overcame, and the way you turned every moment of lack into a lesson in resilience, every setback into a setup for something greater. The way you now speak about your past, not with shame but with pride, gives others permission to reframe their own struggles as the raw material for their future success. The way you invest in the future, not just with money, but with time, with belief, with the unshakable conviction that those who come after you deserve to start where you left off, ensures that your impact will outlive you. The way you live your life, not as someone who escaped scarcity, but as someone who transcended it, becomes the blueprint for others to do the same, proving that abundance isn't about luck, but about the choices you make and the mindset you cultivate. This is why it matters, because echoes don't fade. They multiply, and the story you're living today will become the anthem for those who need to hear it most. As the layers of this echo expand, you begin to see how your life is no longer just about you. It's about the ripple effect of every decision you make, every boundary you set, and every dream you refuse to let die. This is the turning point, where your abundance stops being a personal achievement and starts being a public legacy, where your story becomes the spark that ignites 1,000 others to believe in their own power to rise. The way you now mentor others, not as a favor, but as a responsibility, creates a chain reaction of empowerment, where every person you lift up goes on to lift another and another until your impact becomes a movement. The way you celebrate progress, not just your own, but that of everyone around you, builds a culture where growth is expected, where setbacks are temporary, and where success is seen as a collective triumph. The way you document your journey, not as a memoir of struggle, but as a manual for transformation, ensures that your wisdom will continue to guide others long after you're gone. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of creating this echo is to step into the role of its guardian, to become the steward of a narrative that proves abundance isn't a privilege, it's a practice, and you've spent your life perfecting it. This is how it unfolds. You start by living in a way that honors the echoes of those who paved the way for you, while simultaneously creating new ones for those who will follow. You begin to see every challenge as an opportunity to add another verse to your story, every triumph as a testament to the power of resilience, and every act of generosity as a deposit into the legacy you're building. The story of your life is no longer just about how you turned scarcity into abundance. It's about how you turned your abundance into a force for change, how you made sure that no one who comes after you ever has to believe that their past determines their future. Yet something even more sacred is waiting. And so the journey reaches its final crescendo as you realize that this echo isn't just about what you leave behind. It's about what you awaken in others. The moment they hear your story and think, if they could do it, I can too. And in that moment, your legacy becomes immortal. Can you feel the weight of the moment when you make a vow so sacred, so unshakable, that it becomes the cornerstone of not just your life, but the lives of those who will follow in your footsteps? This is where the journey deepens into something beyond personal transformation. It becomes a covenant, a solemn promise to yourself, to your past, and to the future that you will no longer allow scarcity to dictate the terms of your existence. Picture yourself standing at the altar of your own potential, where the child you once were, the one who knew hunger, who learned to stretch $1 into a miracle, who turned not enough into I will create, meets the adult you've become, the one who now holds the pen to rewrite the story for good. This is how the covenant is sealed, not with ink on paper, but with the fire of your conviction, the unyielding belief that your life will be the living proof that abundance is not a matter of chance, but of choice. This is where truth breaks through. The covenant isn't just a promise, it's a rebirth, a declaration that the old story of lack dies here, and a new narrative of limitless possibility begins. The way you now speak to yourself, not with the critical voice of scarcity, but with the compassionate, empowering tone of someone who knows their worth, rewires your soul to operate from a place of inherent value. The way you handle your resources, not with the desperation of someone afraid of running out, but with the wisdom of someone who understands the cyclical nature of giving and receiving, transforms every transaction into an act of faith in your own ability to create more. The way you face the unknown, not with the paralyzing fear of someone who's been burned before, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has survived the fire and knows they can build from the ashes, proves that you've crossed into a new era of trust in yourself and the universe. This is why it matters. Because this covenant isn't just about you breaking free from your past. It's about you becoming the architect of a future where lack is no longer an inheritance, but a lesson that fuels greatness. As the terms of this covenant take root in your heart, you begin to feel the shift, not just in your circumstances, but in your being. This is the turning point where you stop negotiating with your potential and start demanding the life you were meant to live, where every decision, every risk, and every act of faith becomes a brick in the empire you're no longer just dreaming of. You're building. The way you now set goals, not as distant wishes, but as non-negotiable milestones on the path to your destiny, demonstrates that you've moved from hoping to knowing. The way you honor your past, not by dwelling in its pain, but by using its lessons as the foundation for your future, shows that you've finally made peace with where you came from, not as a victim, but as a victor. The way you invest in your growth, not as an indulgence, but as the highest form of self-respect, signals to the world that you're serious about becoming the person your covenant demands you to be. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this covenant is to extend it beyond yourself, to make it a promise not just to your own future, but to the future of everyone who will ever doubt that they, too, can rise. This is how it unfolds. You start by writing it down, not as a to-do list, but as a sacred text, a manifesto of the life you're committed to creating, the person you're committed to becoming, and the legacy you're committed to leaving behind. You begin each day by reciting it, not as a reminder of what you lack, but as a reinforcement of what you are and what you're building. The story of your life is no longer a tale of survival. It's a legend of liberation, where every word of your covenant becomes a spell that bends reality to your will, and every declaration becomes a promise to the child you once were that their struggles were never in vain. Yet something even more transformative is waiting, and so the journey deepens as you prepare to step into the next phase, living this covenant not as a personal creed, but as a public declaration, proving that abundance isn't a secret, it's a choice, and you've chosen it for life. Picture the moment you realize that every struggle, every setback, and every scar from your past wasn't just a test, it was the crucible that forged the unbreakable version of you, the one who now stands ready to claim the life you were always meant to live. This is where the final transformation happens, where the heat of your hardships doesn't burn you away. It refines you, leaving only the essential, unshakable core of who you were born to be. Imagine standing in the glow of this fire, not as someone who barely survived, but as someone who was tempered by it, who now carries the strength, the wisdom, and the unyielding resolve of someone who has walked through hell and come out the other side with a blueprint for heaven. This is how the forging begins, not with the fear of being consumed, but with the knowing that you were made for this, that every moment of lack was just the fire shaping you into the instrument of your own liberation. This is where truth breaks through. The crucible wasn't your enemy, it was your maker, and the skills you developed in its flames are now the tools you'll use to build the life you've always deserved. The way you now approach challenges, not as threats, but as opportunities to prove how far you've come, shows that you've mastered the art of turning pressure into power. The way you handle uncertainty, not with panic, but with the calm confidence of someone who has already stared down the worst and won, proves that you've developed a resilience that can't be shaken. The way you speak about your future, not with hesitation, but with the absolute certainty of someone who has already seen the other side of their struggles, rewires your brain to operate from a place of inevitable success. This is why it matters, because the crucible didn't break you, it revealed you, and the person who emerged is the one who will finally claim the abundance that was always yours. As the heat of this transformation settles into your bones, you begin to feel the shift, not just in your mindset, but in your identity. This is the turning point, where you stop seeing yourself as someone who overcame scarcity and start seeing yourself as someone who was created to thrive in spite of it. The way you now invest in your dreams, not as a gamble, but as a non-negotiable act of faith in your own potential, demonstrates that you've moved from hoping to knowing. The way you honor your past, not by letting it define you, but by using it as the fuel for your future, shows that you've finally turned your wounds into wisdom. The way you move through the world, not as someone who's lucky to be here, but as someone who belongs here, signals to the universe that you're ready to receive everything that's been waiting for you. But that was only the beginning, because the final act of this forging is to step into the role of the master of your own fate, to take the strength you've earned in the crucible and use it to build a life so abundant, so purposeful, and so alive that it silences every doubt that ever whispered you weren't enough. This is how it unfolds. You start by embracing the heat, not as something to endure, but as something to harness, using the energy of your past to fuel the creation of your future. You begin to see every obstacle not as a roadblock, but as the raw material for your next breakthrough. Every setback, not as a failure, but as the setup for your next level of greatness. The story of your life is no longer about the fires you survived. It's about the masterpiece you're forging in their glow, where every lesson, every scar, and every hard-won victory becomes a brushstroke in the legacy you're painting. Yet something even more profound is waiting, and so the journey reaches its climax as you prepare to step into the final phase, living as the person the crucible created, not just for yourself, but as a beacon for others to find their own fire, and to rise from it stronger, wiser, and more unstoppable than they ever thought possible. Envision the exact moment you realize you are no longer the person who flinched at the sight of an empty wallet, no longer the voice that whispered, "I can't afford this," no longer the heart that feared lack would always be your shadow. This is the ascension, the final, irreversible rise above the old story of scarcity, where you don't just leave lack behind, but you transcend it, stepping into a reality where abundance is as natural to you as breathing. Picture yourself floating above the timeline of your life, seeing with crystal clarity how every moment of struggle was never a sentence, but a sentence you were always meant to rewrite. This is how the ascension begins, not with a sudden disappearance of challenges, but with the unshakable knowing that you are now operating from a place where lack has no power over you, where your mind, your energy, and your actions are aligned with the frequency of someone who creates wealth instead of chasing it. This is where truth breaks through. Ascension isn't about escaping your past, it's about outgrowing it, about reaching a height where the old fears and limitations can no longer touch you, because you've risen too far above them. The way you now think about money, not as a source of stress, but as a tool for creation and freedom, shifts your entire relationship with it, turning every financial decision into an act of empowerment. The way you approach opportunities, not with the hesitation of someone afraid of losing, but with the confidence of someone who knows they can't not win, proves that you've internalized the truth. Abundance is your birthright, and you're finally claiming it. The way you speak about your future, not with the tentative language of hope, but with the absolute certainty of someone who has already arrived, rewires your nervous system to expect miracles, to attract synchronicities, and to move through the world as a magnet for all that aligns with your vision. This is why it matters, because this ascension isn't just about you. It's about every person who will ever look at your life and realize that if you could rise this high, they can too. As you settle into this new altitude, you begin to notice how the world responds to the energy of someone who has ascended above lack. This is the turning point, where abundance stops being something you pursue and starts being something you embody, where every decision, every conversation, and every action is infused with the quiet power of someone who knows they are the creator of their reality. The way you now handle setbacks, not as evidence that you're on the wrong path, but as redirections from a universe that's conspiring in your favor, shows that you've mastered the art of turning detours into destiny. The way you celebrate others' success, not with envy, but with genuine joy, proves that you operate from a place of such deep security that someone else's win only expands your own sense of possibility. The way you invest in yourself, not as an expense, but as the highest return investment you could ever make, signals to the world that you're serious about the life you're building. And the world has no choice but to respond in kind. But that was only the beginning. Because the final act of this ascension is to realize that you're not just rising for yourself. You're rising as a beacon, a living testament to the power of rewriting your story, and an invitation for others to ascend with you. This is how it unfolds. You start to move through the world with a new kind of grace, where every step feels lighter, every breath feels deeper, and every day feels like a gift you've earned through the fires of your past. You begin to attract not just money, but the right opportunities, the right people, and the right resources, because you've finally aligned with the energy that draws them to you effortlessly. The story of your life is no longer about the struggle to escape scarcity. It's about the power of rising so high that lack is no longer even part of your vocabulary. Yet something even more extraordinary is waiting, and so the journey reaches its final transformation as you prepare to step into the ultimate role. Not just as someone who has ascended, but as someone who now holds the door open for others, proving that abundance isn't a solo journey, it's a collective rising, and you've just become its most powerful guide. Can you feel the weight of the moment when you realize your life isn't just a story? It's a legacy, a living testament that will outlast you, a beacon for every soul who ever doubted that their past could be the raw material for their greatness? This is where the journey completes its circle, where the child who once knew hunger, the teenager who stretched every dollar, and the adult who rewrote their story now stand as one, unbroken, unshakable, and utterly unstoppable. Picture the ripple effect of your existence, not as a fleeting moment in time, but as an eternal echo that will reverberate through generations, whispering to every heart that ever felt small. You are not your circumstances. You are the architect of your destiny, and your struggles are the foundation of your empire. This is where truth breaks through. Your legacy isn't built on what you had, but on what you overcame. And the way you turned every moment of lack into a lesson in resilience, every setback into a setup for something greater, and every scar into a badge of honor. The way you now live your life, not as someone who escaped poverty, but as someone who transcended it, becomes the blueprint for others to follow, proving that abundance isn't about luck, but about the choices you make and the mindset you cultivate. The way you speak about your past, not with shame, but with pride, gives others permission to reframe their own struggles as the raw material for their future success. The way you invest in the future, not just with money, but with belief, with time, with the unshakable conviction that those who come after you deserve to start where you left off, ensures that your impact will outlive you. This is why it matters, because legacies aren't built on what we accumulate, but on what we awaken in others. And your life is now the living proof that abundance is a mindset that can be learned, a frequency that can be tuned into, and a reality that can be created from the ground up. As the final layers of your story settle into place, you begin to see how every choice, every risk, and every act of faith was leading you to this moment, not as an endpoint, but as a beginning. This is the turning point, where your life stops being about what you've achieved and starts being about what you inspire, where your abundance becomes a ripple that touches lives you'll never meet, in ways you'll never see, but will always feel in the depth of your purpose. The way you now mentor others, not as a favor, but as a responsibility, creates a chain reaction of empowerment, where every person you lift up goes on to lift another and another, until your impact becomes a movement. The way you celebrate progress, not just your own, but that of everyone around you, builds a culture where growth is expected, where setbacks are temporary, and where success is seen as a collective triumph. The way you document your journey, not as a memoir of struggle, but as a manual for transformation, ensures that your wisdom will continue to guide others long after you're gone. This is how it unfolds. You start by living in a way that honors the echoes of those who paved the way for you, while simultaneously creating new ones for those who will follow. You begin to see every challenge as an opportunity to add another verse to your story, every triumph as a testament to the power of resilience, and every act of generosity as a deposit into the legacy you're building. The story of your life is no longer just about how you turned scarcity into abundance. It's about how you turned your abundance into a force for change. How you made sure that no one who comes after you ever has to believe that their past determines their future. Yet something even more sacred is waiting. And so the journey reaches its ultimate fulfillment as you step into the final role. Not just as someone who rewrote their story, but as someone who became the living proof that abundance is a birthright, and that the greatest legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's the lives you inspire to rise.